And you're live.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining once again our International Book Club. A hard act to follow in December with Colm Tobin, but we've done it. I'm absolutely thrilled that we have the amazing Bonnie Garmus joining us. Bonnie, welcome.
Thank you.
I think most of you know, anyone traveling on a tube in any city of Europe know that Bonnie is a pretty accomplished author and experienced copywriter. Her book that we are reviewing, Lessons in Chemistry, to say it's a smash hit dates me horribly, but it is. She actually published her debut novel, this book, and it's just amazing. It's sold in 35 territories. It has a television adaptation underway. It's become both the #1 Sunday Times and New York Times bestseller. She's also, for those of you who've read the book and sent in questions, a pretty dedicated swimmer and a competitive rower. So without further ado, Bonnie, we've had so many amazing questions come in, and I've picked ones that, having listened to interviews and read as much as I can about you, that are not too typical of what people are asking you, but what people want to know. So, I mean, a first novel of this sort of magnitude that's so funny, has touched so many people. What was the impetus for this book, and how did you go about kind of writing it, the actual act of writing, if you will?
Well, first of all, Harriet, thank you so much for inviting me. This is really exciting for me to get a chance to talk with you today. In answer to your question, really the book kind of, I guess it sprang from a bad mood, a bad day at work. I'm a copywriter, so I write all day. And so I've been working on novels for a while, but that particular day I'd been in a meeting and I had just run into what I consider almost garden variety sexism. But that day I just couldn't shrug it off. And so after I went back to my desk to work, instead of working, I ended up writing the first chapter and the last 3 sentences of Lessons in Chemistry.
Wow. That's a great story. I mean, and so many of us. I'm was born in '61. I've run large corporations and experienced many of the things that you describe. Our eldest son and his partner are rowers and rowing coaches, and we've got swimmers, competitive swimmers in the family. But what I loved about the book and what so many people, the great and the good, have reflected on is the humor. Particularly in my family, as everyone says, I'm not funny and have no humor, but humor is such an essential tool in storytelling. And your book, the idea that me, Nigella Lawson, Elizabeth Day, I don't know, the whole world of women are laughing out loud at some of your funny moments. How do you do that? How do you incorporate it into the writing process whilst keeping them, all of us, so vested in the story and the seriousness? That is so hard to do.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I think it's really important, if you're going to be discussing serious themes, that in order to not sound didactic or be didactic, you have to add humor in. And what I was trying to do in the novel is exactly what you do as a rower, where you're constantly seeking balance. And so there's a lot of darkness in the book, and then there's a lot of light to balance that darkness in the book. As for how do I do that? I don't know. For me, copywriting always included quite a bit of that. I always thought it was important, if I had a message to get across, to make it memorable. Sometimes it's important to make it funny, or if it was going to be one short, serious sentence, then it had to be, propped up by the right visual. So that's, with a book, you're writing all the visuals as well as the copy. So there's the big difference right there.
Yes, absolutely. Another big difference, and a number of people mentioned this, and I didn't have any grandchildren a year ago, and now have two grandsons. But a number of people really commented on your observations, and obviously you're a mom too, about Mad and motherhood, and that was so amazingly brought through. Obviously, your experiences as a mother were important here, but was this also the motherhood piece, bringing up a little one, also part of the balance, Bonnie, or was that something different?
Well, I really wanted to have a protagonist who didn't want to be a mother, because there's certainly nothing wrong with women who don't want to seek motherhood as part of their life story. And so for me, it was really important to have Elizabeth Zott not want to join this club of motherhood, but to not have a choice either way. And so she joins. And I think, at the very beginning, she probably had quite a bit of disrespect for women who stay at home. And once she's in their club and she realizes how hard it is, that changes her attitude about it. And she realizes that it's a sisterhood. And she goes on to explore that.
Yeah. And the theme of friendship, I'm a Harriet too. And so I think Harriet is one of many people's favorite characters. This theme of the sisterhood, friendships between women, which transcends the 60s, 70s, 80s to today. Also, in people who wrote to me, I think our youngest is on this live broadcast, that the sort of loneliness of first motherhood, your first child particularly, and you sort of, that friendship with Harriet, were you inspired by Harriet? Do you have a lot of women friends, and the sisterhood important to you?
I do have a lot of women friends. And I actually, to be honest, I have a lot of men friends too, but I think sisterhood is really important for women. And I think that, so many women are told that having a baby is going to be great and their life is wonderful and they're completely fulfilled. And the truth is, a lot of women go into postpartum depression. Everything is taken from them. They're getting no sleep. The job is much, much bigger than anyone ever tells you it's going to be. And then what if your baby is sick or has a disability or whatever? Then you feel personal failure all the time. And that largely lands on women. It very, very infrequently lands on men. So I think, I really wanted to acknowledge that. And I wanted to have Harriet there as a woman who had been through it, and her suffering, her journey had never been acknowledged because she was just an average woman. And of course, any woman who has raised children is not average.
No. It's amazing because my fellowship is across, the globe. And the one theme that came up from every single region, which is really interesting to me, was around a question that people wanted me to ask you about rejection, that it's a tough pill to swallow, but it's part of the creative process. And they wanted you to share some of your experiences, around rejection. What lessons you've learned? Do you feel it's important, as you this weaves such a tight red thread through Elizabeth, that people wanted to hear your views on rejection and sort of talk us your voice in this.
Well, I had written another novel before, Lessons in Chemistry, and that one was rejected 98 times by agents. I think because it was too long. 700 pages is something for anyone who's writing a novel out there. 700 pages from a debut author is not something an agent wants to see. So, just getting through you work so hard and you have this piece that you've been working on for years, and then it's just completely rejected without anyone looking at it. And that's really hard. But rejection is a normal part of life. And if you
Mm,
can kind of accept the fact that every single one of us will fail, then
yeah.
you get stronger, not weaker. I think it's people who are afraid to show they've failed, or afraid to acknowledge that they're going to fail, or if they get rejected, they blame it on the other person. It's just a normal part of life. And it is really hard to get through, because certainly when I kept getting rejected, I would go home and, kick the sofa or whatever. But you have a choice. You can quit or you can go on, but it's really up to you. And the fact is, I think all the great people who end up doing anything have to go through more failure than success. And I kept that in the back of my head, constantly, that if you're not failing, you're actually not moving forward.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. My sister actually gave me your book for Christmas. And as I was reading it and hoping that you might agree to come and talk with us,
Mhm.
I didn't know at the time, but it's subsequently become, mainstream knowledge that your book is being adapted for Apple TV. And I wondered how you sort of felt about that. You must have had secret thoughts in the kitchen about who would play Elizabeth and who would play Harriet and who would play the dog, one of the most important characters in the whole book. And just sort of wondered, are you allowed to have input to the adaptation process without sharing any state secrets? How does it work?
I have a really, really great film company, Aggregate Films, which is Jason Bateman and Michael Costigan's company. And actually, Brie Larson is one of the executive producers. She's starring as Elizabeth, and she had contacted me before I signed with Aggregate and said, I really want to be Elizabeth Zott. It's really something to be contacted by an
Wow.
Academy Award winner and say, can I play the lead role? And so, I have an astonishing team, and I don't have much skin in the game. I'm not working on this. It's already been filmed. It's wrapped. It's in editing
Wow.
now. And so I have read the scripts and I've made notes on the scripts, but they're not required to take anything that I've suggested. That's our deal. And I think for a writer, going in, because so many other writers will tell you that the book is one thing and the series or film is something else. And
Yeah.
they may share the same spirit, but they're not supposed to be the same. And so you have to allow Hollywood to do their own visualization. That's what they're good at. And they they did ask me who I saw starring in the series. And I am so bad at naming actors. I'd say things like, "Oh, that person who was in blah blah blah." It's just
Yeah.
I'm sure they thought I was pathetic. But it seems like we have a really great cast. And they had to
Wow.
they did change a lot of things, but that is their prerogative to do.
Yes.
So I haven't seen any kind of dailies or anything that like that yet, but I've only heard good things. So we will
Wow.
see how it
Yes.
turns out. But yeah, you kind of have to give away your child and then walk away quickly in the other direction.
Yes.
Because that's just, every writer has told me that. Just be
Yeah.
prepared to walk away. So that's what I've tried
Wow.
to do.
What amazing advice. And the Bonnie Larson, I mean, wow. I mean, if you never do anything else beyond this point, I mean, that is pretty incredible. But
Oh,
I
thank
love
you.
it. And a question that people always ask, and it was interesting, with the different, very, very different authors we've had come on the International Book Club, but people are very interested in your sources of inspiration, in terms of literature or influence, or, particularly as it pertains to lessons in chemistry and the such strong characters you have. You can see the rowing influence maybe, and I hear that you're a dog lover too. So you can see some of this coming together. But from a literary perspective or a sort of an influence? Are there any elements you'd share with those who are tuning in and those who will watch this later?
Well, yes, I think, for me, it's always been a priority to read very broadly. And I usually seek out pretty much either nonfiction or literary fiction. Those are my two favorite genres. So I don't read a lot of mystery, although I used to. I don't read a lot of thrillers or anything. I really like the craft of literary fiction. And so that said, I grew up on things like Dostoevsky or Tolstoy or Flaubert. I love John Irving. He was a big influence on me in terms of outsized characters and empathy for characters. But I also really like Donna Tartt for her craft of a sentence. I'm a huge fan of Barbara Kingsolver. There's so many writers that I could name. One of my favorites is Rachel Joyce. People who write really, really well, but also are able to convey this idea of their characters. Their characters are round. That's what I always think of.
Yeah.
You can see all the sides of them, their failings, their heart, their vulnerability. And so for me, that's what I was going for. But on top of that, all of those writers do the same thing. They tell a big story. And I'm interested in a big story. So that was another influence, I think, is just, read broadly, write broadly.
Yes. And the influence, are you now, we were discussing this at our last International Book Club, it was hilarious, with Colm Tobin, about, are you now part of a sort of the literary set? You go to parties with other great writers. Have you been embraced as the amazing writer you are, or does that take time?
Oh, I think that takes time, and I don't feel like I'm in their club. I mean, I just there's so many writers I revere, like for instance, Margaret Atwood, and she and I share a publicist, and just the idea when he talks about her, I'm just in awe the whole time. So no, but writers have been really generous with me. Some very famous writers have reached out to say, I know that the promotion of the book is quite hard on people like us, so I hope you're doing okay, which I think is so thoughtful, because they actually know, I think writers are kind of introverted, really. We like to be alone. We write alone. I can't write in a cafe or anything like that. And so I think when these other writers reach out to me and say, are you okay? I know exactly what they're referring to.
Oh, that is so authentic and lovely. And a question that popped up in a number of regions, which I think is really interesting generationally when we think about kind of the 60s through to now, is people felt that a very fascinating element of Elizabeth's character is her reluctance to accept help or support from others. Now, obviously, so many of her contributions and ideas had been thwarted or stolen. That's not surprising. And you shared at the very start that, the experiences in a given day propelled you right into the center in this book. But I think people were looking for some advice around, the asking for help. Do you think generationally from the 60s, we as women are getting better at that? Or is it still a challenge? Any thoughts as you made this such an intricate part, I think, of Elizabeth's kind of persona?
Well, I do think people have, in general, trouble asking for help because they think asking for help is a sign of weakness, when in fact it's just the opposite. It's a sign of strength. And so I think, for Elizabeth, she didn't want to ask for help, partly because of her upbringing. She'd never been offered help before, and she didn't really know what to make of it. She'd done everything on her own. The other thing about Elizabeth Zott is that she's based on Stoicism, or the idea of Stoicism, as written by Marcus Aurelius. So she's very, very interested in self-responsibility. She's very interested in logic. And she takes, she just sees things in a rational way. She's trying to make her way in the world without allowing the myths of society to influence her, which is, it's a pretty big, pretty big job.
Yeah.
And so that's really where she came from. But yes, I do think that people should ask for help and feel good about asking for help.
Mm.
But so often, especially for women, if they ask for help, it might be seen as a weakness, but also the person to whom they're asking, they're afraid of being ridiculed, like, oh, you need help. But it's
Yeah.
really not that way at all. I think most people like being asked to
Yes.
help. Most people are more generous than that, but there is always that fear, especially for women.
Yes. Yes. I think the phrasing around, I always think most people like to give their advice and framing it in advice. But yes, those fears exist. And many of us wondered with the cold water swimming, the rowing, dogs and children, those are not in any order. But how much of you is imbued through the book? Because you're a pretty intrepid swimmer, rower, you love outdoor stuff. I read a mom and have dogs. And so how much of Elizabeth or this story is you?
Well, I would say, I certainly agree with her on many, many things, definitely. But I wouldn't say she's me at all. In fact, when I was writing her, I was writing my own role model. Who would I look up to? And so I
Yes.
created her from that idea of who I wish I was more like. She's a chemist. I'm not a scientist. And she's
Yeah.
a single mom. I'm not a single mom. And
Yeah.
she's also a great cook. And I am absolutely the worst cook in the world. I don't even watch cooking shows. And so when I was working on this, it's not unusual in copywriting to write what you don't know. And
Yeah.
so for me, writing what I don't know just came naturally. I'm used to doing, research, and it can be really fun to kind of do that research and look into how people in that world may or may not operate. I think in general, people share the same emotions and vulnerabilities the world over. And one thing I've really learned from this whole book is how much we're alike in every part of the world, and how much we fear the same things and want the same things and don't know how to get them. And so for me, I think that Elizabeth Zott is just this force of nature, and I'm much less a force of nature than than she is. But she is. I think there's a little bit of her in all of us that wish
Yeah.
that we could say no to somebody who's abusing us at work or abusing us in some other way. We just wish we had that internal power that she seems to have in spades. So yeah, I'd say there's that much of me in Elizabeth Zott. I loved writing her because when you have someone that rational in your head, you yourself start to look at the world and say, why are we doing it this way?
Yes. Oh, I think you've given us all an incredible role model. That's what's so, powerful, I think, about the book. We'd all love to sit down with her, and those of us who are not great cooks, look up to her as well. But I think that makes the science piece, your research, even more admirable because, the whole kind of science and innovation and her capabilities, the fact that that's not a part of you, something you researched, is very, very compelling. And I know that we were able to get you on condition that we didn't keep you much beyond that half an hour. I've just got two more things that are very much on people's minds, if I may.
Sure.
What are you reading right now? I mean, you've said that the books that you love, but is there a current book that you're reading right now that you'd like to share? And of course, everyone wants to know, after the sort of wow hit of Lessons in Chemistry, is the second book on its way, in inception, somewhere in your head, or a rest period?
Well, as to the first question, I just finished a book. I'm reading a lot of nonfiction right now, I should say,
Okay.
because I can't read fiction very well when I'm trying to write. So I read a lot of nonfiction, and the book that I just finished not too long ago, really, it's called exceptions. And it's about, let's see, the subtitle is Nancy Hopkins, MIT, and the Fight for Women in Science.
Science.
Yeah, it's a really excellent book. It's really well written. And it's so interesting that I read it, because it's almost like I would have read that first and then written my book. But in fact, my book came out a year before that book. And when I read it, I couldn't believe it. It's exactly the sort of challenges that Elizabeth Zott faced, except at MIT. And so that's been really interesting for me. As for my new book, it's not a sequel. I am really invested in these other people and their problems. And so that's what I'm working on. I never say to anyone anymore what it's about, because I don't write from an outline. And so I will know what it's about after I finish it.
Oh, well, look, this Lessons in Chemistry has brought so many people such joy. The humor, the strength, the role modeling that you've created, as well as, so many other elements. So a huge thank you for giving us just half an hour of your time to sort of alight the screens and share with us amazing little nuggets like with Brie Larson, etc. I have to thank my sister for buying me the book for Christmas. Long may you continue writing. We wish you all the very best, and thank you for your good grace and humor in joining us today, Bonnie. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invite. I really, really loved it.
Pleasure. Take care.